Good morning and good evening, everyone, and welcome to this latest Indica Books live hour and Q&A. And we have taken a fairly long break after December last year. So we are returning after more than 3 months. But I'm delighted today to be on at least a couple of points. The first one is that we have an author who has written a fantastic book. I think everyone should go ahead and read it, buy a copy, read it. And also that we also have a co-host with us. So without further ado, let me start off. The first thing is that this is Indica Books live Q&A, right? So you can follow us on Twitter at Indica Books. You can go and join the Facebook group at facebook.com/group/Indic Book Club. We're also on Instagram at indica.books. And the purpose of Indica Books is to promote good writers and their works, to nurture writers, create an author ecosystem, all centered around people who are writing, interested, passionate about Indic themes. This does not include just Indian authors. It includes anyone writing and interesting about India and Indic themes and writing with an Indic perspective. So with this, as you can see from the background, we have Satyarth Nayak, who has written this wonderful book called Mahagatha, 100 Tales from the Puranas. It's been published by HarperCollins India, and I must call out HarperCollins for being kind enough to reach out to Indica Books and therefore setting in these steps in motion that has led to us getting to know Satyarth and talk about his book. So first of all, I want to read out a little bit about Satyarth. So he's an author and screenwriter based in Mumbai, and he's a former SARC award-winning correspondent with CNN-IB in Delhi, and he holds a master's degree in English literature from St. Stephen's College. His best-selling biography, Sridevi, the Eternal Screen Goddess, was published by Penguin in 2019. And we don't need to talk about Sridevi. She was a superstar in her own right. And this book met with high acclaim, and his debut novel, The Emperor's Riddles, was released in 2014 and became a best-selling thriller. And it earned comparisons with Dan Brown for being a history meets mystery. And Satyarth followed it up with a second thriller, Venom, in 2020. He has also scripted Sony's epic historical show, Puranas, touted as India's most expensive television series that aired from 2017 to 2019. And his short stories have won the British Council Award and appeared in Sudha Murthy's Penguin anthology, Something Happened on the Way to Heaven. And he's been named one of the top 50 authors to follow on social media. And he's a regular speaker at national and international literature festivals. And this is his latest book, Mahagatha, 100 Tales from the Puranas. And we also have with us a co-host who's also very interested in all this and is going to be asking Satyarth questions, is Arun Krishnan. He is the author of the first book of the Battle of Vatapi trilogy, Nandi's Charge. So without further ado, welcome Satyarth to
Hi Abhinav, it's wonderful. Hi, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Yes. Hi, Abhinav. Wonderful to be to finally do this live with you, and of course to be a part of the Indica family through this. So it's a pleasure, an absolute pleasure to chat with you and Arun. It's wonderful, and we hope we have a wonderful conversation ahead.
Likewise. So, folks, for those of you who haven't read the book, and it has become, and you shared this wonderful news with us, Satyarth, that Mahagatha has become a national bestseller. So that I think is congratulations on that.
Thank you so much.
So nice to see a book on the Puranas, become a national bestseller. Now, I'll go ahead and ask you. First of all, I'm not going to ask you why 100 tales, because it's a nice round enough number. But tell us a little bit about how you went about conceptualizing and writing this collection, and how difficult was it to persuade a publisher to pick this up? Because the fact of the matter is that there is no dearth of books on the Mahabharata, on the Ramayana, on the Puranas. It's a perennially popular topic with readers. But still, how did you convince the publisher, and how did you go about conceptualizing this book?
So, I have always grown up loving and reading Puranas. I think my initial growing up years, I remember my grandfather. I think he instilled the love of the Puranas, of mythology, really, in me. I remember just sitting on his lap and lapping up. He had this treasure trove of stories to offer, and I would just lap it all up. It was such a wonderful process of osmosis for me as a child. I think my core love for mythology really comes from there, from him, which is why Mahagatha is also dedicated to him. And then, of course, once I grew up, that love remained, and I wanted to explore it further. So then, of course, began my journey of reading as many texts as possible, whether it's Ramayana, Mahabharata, Puranas. And when it entered the universe of the Puranas, that's when I was completely staggered. The kind of writing that is there, the kind of stories that the Puranas offer, just the sheer imagery, the larger than life spectacles. I think I was completely fascinated. And I also realized that while there are many stories that one knew because one had grown up hearing those, there is so much more that one also did not know. So this was like an ocean that I had deep dived into. And then hopefully I have come out with 100 pearls. So that's Mahagatha for me. It's my love letter to mythology. That's how I would like to describe the book. It was fairly easy to convince publishers because I think it was initially with Westland, and they loved the idea that someone had put together a book on Puranas because they felt that was a vacuum in the market. While there are stories on Mahabharata and Ramayana out there, but something so concrete on the Puranas specifically, and that to a collection of 100 stories, that they found very interesting. They found the collection of stories very interesting, and they loved the writing style. They said this is something we would definitely want to pick up. So that's when it initially went to Westland, and when Westland shut down, it then went to Harper. So the book has had quite an interesting journey of its own, and I'm so glad finally that the book has become a bestseller. It's getting great reviews everywhere, and so what more can an author ask for? Very happy author chatting with you here.
Absolutely. So, uh, this book is more than 400 pages long.
Yeah,
How difficult was it to convince, Westland and then Harper that, for, because one of the things that we often hear, both as readers as writers, is that the longer the book, the higher the cost, and therefore there are a lot of
yeah.
commercial considerations that come in. How easy or difficult, a tougher sell was this?
I did not actually face that issue with either of the publishers because they both realized the importance of the length of the book. They did realize that every story here needed its own space. And even when I was writing the book, I had kept that in mind that every story had to be given the space it demanded. So that is why there are some stories that are probably 1 page long, 2 page long, some are actually longer. So there's no calculation that has worked there. For me, it has simply been what the story demanded and deserved. It has been given that space, and once my manuscript was ready, the publishers also realized that this book needed that kind of space. The stories needed to be given that sort of length. So, in fact, I'm so glad that the final edit that you have in your hands is not something that it has not gone through any sort of drastic, transformation in terms of the word count or in terms of how long it is. It is very much in its pristine state, the way the book was written and conceived. So that way, I'm very fortunate, and the readers have also responded to that. That we love the fact that the stories are short and crisp, while some are long because they need that kind of space. But overall, it's a great read, and it is fairly engaging. So that for me then is quite a win-win, if you ask me.
So, one thing that struck me, and I think would also a lot of other readers also, is that this follows some sort of a linear chronological narrative.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
while it is difficult to ascribe any kind of definitive chronology to the events described in the Puranas, but still,
yeah,
you start off with creation,
yeah.
and you end with the Sri Krishna's death in the penultimate chapter, and then you have Janmajaya Sarp Satra, the snake sacrifice, which
Yes,
also
yes,
set the grounds for the first public retelling of the Mahabharata.
yeah.
So it
Right.
is somewhat, you have, what do you call,
A linear format
Dwapar
in
Yuga
mind.
is
Is
correct. Dwapar Yuga has ended,
Yes,
Kali Yuga has started. So
yes.
first of all, what led you to this decision?
When I was reading the stories in the Puranas, what struck me the most was how every story was actually connected to a lot more stories around it. Once while growing up, you hear these stories. and in your mind you feel that these are standalone events. But once I entered the universe of Puranas, what was fascinating was that the stories actually are all connected to each other, and one story was leading to another, then that was leading to another. So for me, it became essential that they should not just be a random collection of stories, but it should reflect this nature of connectivity that you find in the Puranas. That the stories are not, just random occurrences in the cosmos, but every story has a past and a future, and they all link together by the chain of karma, by the chain of action and reaction. So that way, the universe is fairly Newtonian, because every action leads to a reaction. So for me, that was very important to capture that in the book. So which is why all my readers, I will be telling them that this book is not just a collection of stories; it is actually a chain of events, and every story is one link in the chain, and it is this one cosmic chain that begins in Satya Yuga with the creation of the universe by Brahma, and it comes to some sort of culmination in the Kali Yuga with the story of the Sarpasatra. So what you're reading is actually one great epic story, and these are actually 100 chapters in that story. Which is why this is actually being, that is the reason why the book is called Mahagatha. That while we have 100 gathas together, they make one epic Mahagatha. So that chronology is very important, and which is why, and that has actually become a big selling point. That the readers are now telling me that what this chronology has done is that it's now giving them a more holistic picture of these stories. So Mahagatha basically gives you, it zooms out and gives you a more holistic view of the entire mythology of our entire stories, and you connect these dots a lot more that you might not have done earlier. So that is the reason why the linear format.
Can
And
I come
and
here? Can I come in
correct.
here, with a follow-up question?
Yeah, of
Yes,
course, of
yes,
course.
yes. I was just going to say that, and I think this particular decision has worked very well, both
Yeah.
from, I think, an artistic point of view, as well as I think a commercial point of view also, because this
Yes.
makes the book
Yes.
stand out. Arun,
Right.
go ahead.
Exactly. Exactly.
So, one thing I wanted to ask you, Satyarth, is when you approached writing this book, did you take a very objective, detached view of telling the stories as a storyteller, or, I mean, are you like a deeply religious Hindu or Sanatani, and you're coming at it from that insider's angle? Because that,
Yeah.
I'm very interested by that. I mean, are we looking at it, when we tell stories, do we look at it as a very objective exercise, or are we also kind of going through a transformation in our own, the way we view the world?
Right. I would probably say it's a mix of both. I mean, I definitely would not consider myself an ultra religious person. I think I'm fairly that way. I have my own set of beliefs that are very dear to me, that I hold very close to myself. But when I entered the world of Puranas, I did not do so with any sort of preconceived notions as to what I wanted to do and how I wanted to do. For me, what was, of course, very important and very vital was that I present the stories exactly the way they're there in the Puranas. I did not want to color them with my own thoughts or perspectives or my own any sort of opinions that I might have. Because I feel that would have been a great injustice. Because the Puranas, this is first of all, it's part of our heritage. It's been there for thousands of years, and so it kind of became my sacred duty to present it to the readers in the most pristine way possible, the way it was in the Puranas. And I wanted to respect the material and give it the sort of reverence it demanded. So, which is why if you read the author's note, I very clearly mentioned that the stories, while I might have taken some sort of creative liberties here and there in terms of the body of the story, the souls, the very atma of the stories, that remains untouched, untarnished, and completely untainted. So that for me was very, very vital, that I present them exactly how they are. And which is also the reason why, like a lot of people ask me, why don't you have morals at the end of every story? I said I don't want to do that. I want my readers to engage with the stories themselves and draw their own morals. I don't wouldn't want to impose my morals and my learnings and my interpretations on them. Which is what the book which is what the book is so engaging, because it engages you on so many levels to draw your own conclusions. And that for me was very, very important, that the readers engage with these stories.
I think that's a fantastic point, and I'm,
Yeah,
you've done it. Because when you read those stories, you kind of, you get that feeling. So,
thank you.
this is a nice segue into my next question. Okay,
Yeah,
uh,
yeah,
since it's a chronology and it starts off with, let's say, almost like a Nasadiya Sukta, beginning of the creation, the Hindu or Indic view of creation, and ends
yeah,
with Dwapara Yuga and start of Kali Yuga, right?
yeah, yeah,
Now, we know that the Puranas list kings post the Mahabharata war, and that extends up to the Nandas, right? So
Yes,
we
yes,
kind of, so now at what, and you've used the word that you said from childhood you were interested in mythology.
yeah,
Now, at some point, there is a crossover between mythology and history here, because the Nandas are history. I
yeah,
would
of course.
there will be people who would say, hey, even Krishna or Rama are history, because they
Yeah,
are called
yeah,
itihasas in our tradition.
yes, yes,
So,
yeah.
what are your views on that? How do you distinguish between what is mythology and what is history?
For me, this debate is something I've never really agreed to, because in my mind, this is no offense to history scholars or the discipline of history by itself, because it's a wonderful discipline and a very, very important and a vital part of human civilization and evolution. But I've always wondered that why is mythology given a lesser place than history? I mean, the moment you argue that the Puranas are history, or Ramayana is history, or Mahabharata is history, you are kind of giving a value judgment where you're placing history above mythology. And that is something I don't agree with. For me, mytho is just absolutely, I mean, history stands no chance in front of mythology. History for me is very time bound. It talks about dates. It talks about BC and AD. It is within that one span of so many years that you talk about. Mytho is timeless. Mytho is not bound by time or space. It is timeless. It is Sanatan. It has no beginning and no end. It deals with stories and characters. It deals with forces that are beyond our comprehension. So to kind of restrict that within the space of history, for me, I think is highly, highly disrespectful to what mythology really, really entails. Also, I think a lot of us have this very wrong interpretation of mythology, which is that it is something that is untrue, something that is a lie. That, I think, is a very colonial description, a very colonial definition of the word mythology. Mytho is something that is beyond human. That is just larger than life. That is what mythology is. It is not about truth or lie. It is something that is beyond human comprehension. So then you really cannot box that with history. Also, with history, I've always felt that there is always a sense of arrogance, because you say that I know, I have the evidence to prove. Mytho says, I don't know, but I don't care because I believe. Mytho does not demand evidence, it demands your faith and belief. And that is something that just takes Mytho to a completely different level. So for me, this comparison itself has always been very unfair. I think when we say something is mythology, for me at least, the value system is very clear that it is something that is beyond human realm, beyond human comprehension. It is larger than life, something that demands no evidence, but just your own belief, your own faith. And that is what mytho for me is. That is what I believe in.
That's I would say that's extremely eloquently put, and it's a very interesting way of looking at it.
Thank you.
Avinav?
Thank you.
Yeah, no, definitely. So, we have been talking about how well the book has been written and how fluidly it reads and all. But I think the evidence has to be in the pudding, so to say. So, Satyarth, I will request you to read a couple of pages, of your favorite a passage from the book, if you will.
Sure. What I think I'll read is the story of Swaha, because that is a story that a lot of people have fallen in love with. It is, of course, a very short story, which will also serve our purpose here. And I think it just one of the things that is great about the Puranas is how the way it celebrates women, the Shakti, the power of the feminine, And I think Swaha is a story that illustrates it very beautifully, because it just comes across as this wonderful, wonderful tale of a woman and how she comes across and how she saves the gods from possible extinction. So I think there can be no better story than this. Let me read this out for your readers. Right. A new dawn had just broken when the Creator saw all the gods marching towards Brahmalok. He smiled as they entered, but the next moment he turned tense. Everyone appeared frail and famished. Their faces were hardly luminous, and their bodies were more bone than flesh. On inquiring, the Devas informed Brahma that they had nothing to eat. I don't understand. Nothing to eat? How's that possible? Down below on Bhulok, the earth is providing food for humans. They don't have to toil in any way, as she keeps bearing roots and fruits. But up here in heaven, there is nothing to feed us, the god said. How do we sustain ourselves? Brahma replied, Through yajnas. The Vedas decree that when men and women perform yajnas on earth, they make offerings through Agni, the mouth of the gods. Those oblations poured into the fire are carried directly to you, and in return, you grant them boons and blessings. A yajna is but a barter of energies that benefits everyone, a symbiosis that nurtures both gods and humans. Indra says, we know that. Humans are regularly conducting yajnas on earth, but none of their offerings are reaching us here. Why not? Asked Brahma. It's the fire god, Kamdeva protested. He is failing us. Agni came forward and folded his hands. I am truly to blame, Parampita. I can burn the offerings made by men, but I am unable to transport them to the Devas. I do not possess that skill. Everyone here is starving because of me. What should I do? Brahma was puzzled now. He scratched his foreheads, but they yielded no solution. He then consulted Vishnu, who advised him, pray to Prakriti, Mother Nature. She will come to our aid. The creator invoked Prakriti, who immediately spawned a young goddess to preside over the ritual offerings. She would become the cosmic conduit to transmute oblations and make this vital exchange possible between earth and heaven. You are our lifeline now, Brahma told her. What has Prakriti named you? Swaha, he said. The creator announced. Henceforth, every offering made to Agni in a yajna must end with the word Swaha. If her name is not chanted, the libation poured into the fire will not reach the gods. Any incantation without Swaha shall be like a tree without fruit, a snake without venom, and a man without knowledge. The yajna shall remain incomplete and prove inauspicious. The Devi had saved the Devas. Brahma gave Swaha in marriage to Agni, and the two remained forever united. So this story, a lot of people have fallen in love with. They're like, this does exemplify how the Puranas not just celebrate women and Shakti, but how it also kind of puts her in a space where there are times when she becomes the savior. She becomes the person who rescues the gods, the alpha male gods. So a wonderful story, and I found this in the Puranas, and it had to be in the book.
I
Oh,
love this.
wonderful.
I remember after I read it that evening during dinner, I shared this with my kids, saying, "Hey, do you know why people say Swaha?" And I remember I read this long back somewhere, I think, but this one was really well written. I think, yeah, I think our kids need to kind of the younger
Yeah.
generation needs to know all this.
Yes. Absolutely.
So, Satyarth, moving a little bit in a slightly different direction,
Yeah.
the entire corpus of the Mahapuranas, right? If you look at the 18 plus 1 Mahapuranas, and you have taken some stories from the Ramayana and the Mahabharata also, but if you just look at the Mahapuranas, right, you're looking
Yeah.
at a
Yeah.
corpus of several lakh shlokas. Literally, we're
Yes.
talking of tens of thousands of pages of if they were to be translated into English.
Yes. Yes.
What were your primary sources, or how did you go about figuring out what to include, what to exclude, how to organize them in this manner, right? Because it's not as if there
Yeah.
are 100 stories and all you had to do was figure out what the sort order would be.
Yeah.
There are literally
Yeah. Yeah.
thousands of stories.
Yeah. So in fact, that's right. In fact, I remember the very first list of stories that I had created was around 300 stories. That was the list that had come out of all the readings of the Puranas. My primary readings were whatever texts were available to me in English, because I, of course, cannot, unfortunately, read Sanskrit. So I had to rely on the whatever English versions were available of the Puranas, and thankfully there were a lot of those that are available. You have a wonderful set of books by Professor B.K. Chaturvedi, who has written, and the Puranas that he has, the way he has narrated them in English, they are short and crisp, and they kind of give you the main matter of the book, and not so much of the philosophy and the cosmology, but rather the stories that are actually the meat of the Puranas, so to say. So like I said, the initial list was 300, and then to cull that down to 100 was a process in itself. I remember not ever tiring of the entire journey. I think it was a complete joy, because, like I said, it was such a wonderful world to step into, and just to come across the stories every day. It was a new story, a new learning, a new wisdom. a new discovery, so to say, about our stories, about our gods, our heritage, and just marveling at the kind of writing that has happened in our ancient times, just the sort of wisdom that is so relevant even today that the Puranas have. So all of that just made it a completely fascinating experience. So I then kind of followed a three-pronged criteria as to what stories will make to the final list. One, of course, the stories had to be interesting. I mean, that was the most important thing. It needed to really linger in your mind once you'd finished reading. Also, secondly, who were the entities involved in the stories? Who were the characters that the stories had kind of forefronted in them? And also, if there are lesser known stories that deserved a wider audience, because they are just so fascinating by themselves that they needed to be put out there in the spotlight, like the story of Swaha. It needed to reach a much wider audience. So that criteria really helped me to bring it down to 100, and so that is how the book shaped up.
Nice. And uh, in see anyway, there was a question that was forming in my mind, but for some reason,
Can I jump
so
in?
you go ahead. Yes, you go ahead.
So, okay, so here is something that I found when writing, right? So we are all a product of an English education, correct?
Yeah,
So
yeah,
we learn, we speak, we sometimes even think in English, and that
yes,
also means that we are conditioned in a way to the way, the way the English language works, with the way the imagery works in an English language, right? Now, I
yeah,
found something which intrigued me, and I thought I should talk whenever I get a chance to you, I should ask you. So I'm going to ask
sure,
you that. This occurs in your in chapter 5, man is created, right?
right,
In the last page, where you say Brahma was elated, creation would
yeah,
take care of itself now. He had created man, the highest
yeah,
form, God's own image, the intent of the universe. When I read those words, I paused because to me that sounded very much like a
Christian
modern
mythology.
Christian, yeah, it because that form
Yeah,
the placing of man above all else in creation is a very Christian look at the
yeah,
universe.
yeah,
I'm
yeah, yeah,
curious
yeah.
as to your thought process as you wrote that.
No, I agree. And in fact, you're the first one who's pointed that out to me. And now that I kind of am, now that it is churning in my mind, maybe somewhere you're right. Maybe somewhere the conditioning, subconsciously, it might have come across to present man as the highest creation. But also, if you see the Puranas, the way Brahma is, the reason why Brahma knows that ultimately he has to create man is such an important creation, so vital to the universe, is also because he will then be able to, of course, reproduce and then populate the earth. So man does occupy a very, very important position, in his scheme of things. It might, yes, I agree, it might not be as important as it is given in Christian mythology, in Western mythology, but somewhere down the line, the fact that man is created in his own image, and man ultimately then goes on to become the driving force of earth and Prithvi and Srishti, in such a major way. I think that is where I was leaning towards, which is why for Brahma, while the animals form so easily when he is after Shatarupa, it is when creating comes to creation of man that is the biggest challenge that he faces, and which is ultimately when Shivji comes and helps him out. So the fact that something so important had to be achieved with so much of hard work and so much of mental labor. So I think somewhere that also, in my mind, it also meant that ultimately you're creating the greatest possible creation, so it would take the longest and the hardest time. So maybe all of those factors could be the reason why that the words are the way they are.
Okay, thank you. No, that I was just intrigued when I read that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
And there's something I struggle, right? For example, when we write gods in English,
yes,
usually the G is put in lowercase, right?
yes,
Whereas
yes,
I try and make sure when I write gods, when I'm writing about India, then it is
yeah,
uppercase G. It's not lowercase.
uppercase.
So things like that,
Okay,
right?
okay,
Yes,
right,
to
right.
yeah. And these things come subconsciously to us because of the conditioning, I think.
It does. It does. I completely agree. Yeah, yeah. Because I think, majorly, like you said, we have grown up, as part of a particular education system. So that does kind of that remains deep embedded deep within. So when you are looking at another, you're looking at different cultures, a set of culture values, and then you're presenting that it does somewhere, the interplay happens somewhere, I think, very, very subconsciously, where you are borrowing words and figures and, cultural associations and cultural representations that you might think are a part of a worldview, but they might remain alien in so many ways. So I think, so it's an interesting point. And maybe when I write my sequel, I'll keep this in mind. I'll be a lot more careful in my second book.
Sure. No, I mean,
So,
go ahead. Yeah, Abhinav.
so first of all, I think then we can safely assume that a sequel is going to be on its way soon.
Well,
Even though,
yeah.
go ahead, Satyarth.
Well, I mean, there are talks, of course, with HarperCollins, especially because this one has done so well. So they are looking at, why don't we, plan something in the same vein. And so I'm looking at maybe the remaining stories if they could be a part of the sequel. But the only reason I'm still hesitating is because, what you really have in Mahagatha are the best of the stories. These are really the greatest stories that are there in the Puranas. Of course, there is a lot more that remains unexplored and all of that. But for me, when I remember putting out the 300 stories, the list, and then bringing out to 100, I knew that there was so much more that really did not excite me in the way these 100 stories did. So it is still something I'm trying to negotiate within myself, that it's still something that is kind of some sort of a conflict. How do I bring out, what do I bring out? Or if not the Puranas, maybe something, maybe I tap into some other resource, some other writing, some other text, body of texts that we have. I mean, we have so much in our heritage. It's just a matter of looking and investigating, and I'm sure I'll find another rich vein, another extremely rich ore of stories to tap into and mine. So yeah, so definitely it's a journey that I have embarked upon. Let's see where it leads me.
No, certainly. And you made a very interesting point that there are thousands of stories, but there are some that are much more well known to readers than
Yeah.
others, and there are
Yes.
some that
Yes.
appeal to us in ways that we perhaps couldn't even explain, if we tried.
Yeah.
Uh, but I want to switch focus a little bit to the process of writing itself. Now, you are a product of St. Stephen's College, right? So that you would have been
Yeah.
exposed to a lot of English literature, English writing. What have
Yes.
been some of the biggest influences on you in terms of writing or authors or genres that have left a deep imprint on you, or do you think have informed your writing?
I've always been extremely partial to the short story. I think I've always loved reading short stories, and so I think the greatest writers of short stories across the world have been a huge, huge influence. Whether it's Tolstoy, whether it's O. Henry, whether it's so many of them. I mean, and of course in India, of course we have Tagore, we have Premchand, we have Ismat Chugtai, we have R.K. Narayan. I mean, it's endless, the kind of the list of short story writers. And so I think subconsciously somewhere I've always been very partial to this particular genre. I think a short story is complete in itself. It's like a drop of water that is complete in itself. It just needs nothing around it. So, which is the reason why this is my first book that is actually written in that particular format of short stories. My other books have been novels or a biography. So that also was very exciting to finally enter the zone that I love so much and try my hand at that. So I think very, very subconsciously, short story writers have been a huge influence for me. Just the way you present a story within a particular restricted space and time, and how within that restricted space you say what you have to say. Your characters are what they are, and everything is formed and fleshed out within a short span of time and space. That I feel is as challenging as it is exciting. So I think that has been a huge, huge influence on me. And of course, mythology has been a huge part of my reading. Of course, now, of course, it's whether it's Devdutt or Anand Neelkanthan, or of course it's Amish and all of them. But otherwise, also one has been reading and hearing. In fact, I think mytho once one hears it more than one reads as one grows up. So there are a lot of these eclectic influences definitely have been there, and which I'm now exploring, whether it's through my thriller writing or my biography, and now through Mahagatha. So I think I'm also kind of exploring everything that I've enjoyed reading myself. I'm exploring those as a writer. So I think that is how the journey is going on so far.
A quick
Right.
follow-up
And
question, Abhinav.
yeah, go ahead,
When,
Arun.
when when you wrote these 100 stories,
Yeah.
did you see any character which developed over the course of the stories, like a Brahma in the first story versus a Brahma who comes later on? Is there in your mind an evolution of that Brahma in terms of the characteristics or he,
Yeah.
plays?
I think the only if I look at that particular aspect of the Puranas, I think the evolution that was very clear to me was that of Vishnu actually, because Brahma somehow has a very restricted space within the Puranas for whatever reasons. He doesn't, although he is the creator and a huge part of the Trinity, but he has been given a very restricted space within the Puranas, and Mahadev Shivji kind of remains aloof from he being the I mean the whether you call him a sannyasi or whether you call him the hermit that he was. Of course he later becomes the householder, but he prefers to stay away and just engage with himself. It is Vishnu who has always been engaging with society, with preservation, and of course with making sure that the cosmos created by Brahma remains as safe as possible. And it's always the concept of greater good that Vishnu carries with him throughout. So in every yuga, if you see Vishnu, it's interesting how he also gets cursed many times because of within this pursuit of greater good, when he does things which on the face of it might seem as an injustice, but for him it is about greater good. It is about the good of as many people as possible. And for that, if something uncomfortable and something that kind of might be seen as not within the space of good or dharma, if even if that needs to be done, he does that, and he's cursed for that many times. And also for me, it is interesting how he evolves even in terms of his avatar. So if he takes birth as Ram in Treta Yuga, then he is the upholder. Every rule is upheld. Society, he considers himself a servant of society, and so every rule, every norm is upheld. He is the upholder. But when Vishnu comes as Krishna in Dwapar Yuga, the upholder has now become the uprooter, where every rule, every norm is questioned, and ultimately everything is brought down to its most basic level, so that the next yuga, the next cycle can come. So that for me was very exciting, very interesting to see that journey of Vishnu, and how in every yuga for him ultimately how he makes sure that the greater good and dharma is upheld no matter what. So that for me was his journey was but very, very remarkable for me.
Wonderful,
Right.
wonderful.
Uh, let's talk about the actual writing process now, right? So
Yeah, yeah,
uh, here's the thing. A lot of us know these stories. We are very comfortable with them. We understand them. We empathize with the characters and all. Some of
yeah.
us are very good raconteurs. Also, we can,
Yes,
in a gathering late at night with the, with friends, with the family or
yeah,
whoever,
yeah.
we can talk about these stories. I know for a fact that I've had discussions that have started off on a whim with friends and have continued for an hour or more on just the Mahabharata character
Right.
and all.
Yeah.
However, when it comes to putting this down on paper, it's a very different skill that is involved, which
Yes,
I think
yes,
some of
yes.
us, a lot of us, maybe all of us, either don't understand or we underestimate.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
in your book, as we have said that that does not seem to be an impediment because of how well the stories are written. Now,
Yeah.
I know enough about writing to know that this doesn't happen by accident. It's not that you just put pen on paper and the writing is
Yeah,
magically good. Tell us a
yeah.
little bit about the writing process itself, how you wrote, your influences when it comes to the craft of writing, and how did it go from the first draft on paper to what you submitted to the publisher.
Right. Abhinav, influences, if I talk about, I mean, there is, again, like I said, there's so many eclectic influences. It's difficult to really pinpoint as to what particular writer might have influenced me in the way I write. I think ultimately it's very difficult for any writer to answer that question. I think it does boil down to probably every writer that you read, subconsciously it becomes a part of you in somewhere creatively. And I think one probably is not even aware of that when one is writing, that somewhere that writer's words or the way he writes, I think some that kind of flows out of your pen. So I think it's difficult to specifically point out writers and influences. But what I would definitely say is that, like I said earlier, also for me it was very important, and I realized that I was writing and representing something that is a part of our heritage, something that has been there for thousands of years, and something that is ancient wisdom. And if I wanted to present it and rewrite it or narrate it and give it to a new set of readers who are reading today, I needed to do that with a certain amount of reverence, with a certain amount of respecting the material, and making sure that I present it in a language that befits the stories, that way fits the characters. Because these are, like I said, these are cosmic stories, these are cosmic characters, and you needed to do justice to them with a sort of language. The language had to have a certain amount of dignity. It had to have a certain amount of aura. If I only then could I describe something like the falling of Ganga on the head of Shiva. I mean, that spectacle itself gives me goosebumps. So to present that in terms of writing, the writing needed to have that power and that sort of character within itself. Also, it is very important for me that when I write these stories, I also strived that when you read, of course, what you're reading is printed text, but I wanted that the stories should sound as if someone is narrating the stories to you. It needed to have a certain oral quality about it. I wanted that also, because stories are best enjoyed when you hear them. Reading is secondary. Its stories are best narrated, and that is how you enjoy them. So an attempt was also there while writing them, that it should have a certain quality of being an oral narration rather than reading on a printed text. So all of those factors were there in my mind, and if you feel that somewhere I have done justice to the way the stories are, then I think somewhere I've succeeded in that endeavor.
That's a very that's a very good point you made towards the end, Satyarth. And Arun
Yeah.
and I have talked about this quite a lot, which is that the stories they come alive when they are read out, and
Yes. Yes. Exactly.
they can't just remain on paper. And therefore, one
Yeah.
of the very
Yeah.
important parts of, I think, right, of the writing process is to read out your own writing to see how
Yes.
the sounds
Yes.
appeal to your own ears. So
Absolutely. Very, very important. Yeah, yeah. I do that a lot. Yes, I do that a lot. Every time something is written out, you need to read it out. And then of course you see how the words are in the interplay of the words, even the sounds, the phonetics are so important when you're putting out something as special as the Puranas. And so all of that, the beauty of the language, and ultimately the just put across and communicate as clearly as possible, because this is such delicate and wonderful wisdom that if it gets lost in translation, that would be the worst thing that I could have done to something as fascinating as the Puranas. So all of those were very, very interesting and very, very deep considerations while writing the book, and hopefully I have matched up to some extent.
I'll tell you what I enjoyed the most, and that is the lack of something. And I'll tell you what that something is. Okay.
Wow. Yeah, please do. Yeah.
There is a 3 volume Mahabharata from Amar Chitrakatha, right?
Right.
We have it at
Yeah.
home. You read it, and there is often when people are talking to each other, he will say, "Oh Veda Vyasa, oh Janme Jaya," right? Now
Yeah.
I know the literal translation from Sanskrit, because that is how you, as a Sambodhan, right? How you call
Yes.
somebody
Yes. 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 Yeah.
not translate well in English. So when you read it in English, my kids get very bored when they say, "What is this? Oh, this and oh, that." Oh, and you have stayed away from it. When people
Yeah.
are addressing
Yeah.
each other, you've gone away from the traditional "Oh Vishnu" and "Oh Brahma." And I
Yeah.
actually
Yeah.
found
Yeah.
that very refreshing, because it lends itself to a much nicer uh, story in English, in the language.
Yeah, 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 yeah. In fact, it's interesting that you point that out, because I remember in one of the initial drafts, I remember using a lot of certain archaic words, which I thought would sound good because that is the space we are in. So I would use words like verily, instead of saying truly, I would say verily. And
Yeah.
I thought we are in that space. It would sound good. And I remember using the word fi a lot, FIE, a lot when I'm cursing someone. So which I think again is a part of the whole ancient Elizabethan literature, that suddenly wo thoda nikal aata hai when you're writing. So I think, and I remember my editor at Westland saying, "Listen, I know that these are ancient stories, but the way you're writing and where you're retelling them is extremely modern and very contemporary. So let's not go and let's not use these words." So this actually came from her. So I must give her credit for that. So I think a lot of, if you do find it contemporary, there is also the editor who always remains an invisible force behind these books, but who also should be celebrated as much as the writer. And so yeah, so I'm very thankful to her. Her name is Deepthi Talwar, and she has been a huge part of why the book and how the book has turned out. So yeah, so I completely get what you're saying, and I'm glad that so that we could uh, not be in that space, and we could be a little more contemporary in the terms of the way the stories are written.
that's a very fascinating point that you made, Satyarth, about the role of the editor. And
Yes, yes,
it is considered de rigueur to acknowledge and thank the editor. Every author does that and all.
Yeah,
But I
yeah,
think
yeah,
editors are also very different. No two editors are the same.
yeah,
You have, very, you have editors who are very hands off. I mean, if that's even possible. And you have
yeah,
editors who are very, very particular about certain things, to the extent that one gets the impression at times that they're perhaps trying to dictate their own way of thinking onto the
yeah,
author.
yeah,
How have, not talking specifically about this particular book Mahagatha and your
yeah,
experiences
yeah,
with the editor, but see, since we are Indica Books and we work a lot with writers, upcoming writers and authors, I
yeah,
wanted to
yeah, yeah.
ask if you can share some of your experiences as well as thoughts on what makes for a good editor.
Right. First of all, it's a very symbiotic relationship that an editor has with the writer. And first of all, the editor should make sure that what is being offered to her to read, that of course, when an editor goes through it, she should understand the soul of that story, the book, and the characters. A writer always comes from a different place in terms of how he's writing, what he's writing, why he's creating something. So to understand from where the writer is coming from, what is the writer's mental space, and what is really his psyche, which is what the book is a product of. The editor needs to understand that really well. Only when an editor is in sync with that, that is when, then some sort of a symphony can happen, where the editor can say that, listen, what you have created, I understand where you're coming from, and I get your point, I get your characters and your stories, but listen, these are things that can be made better, and these are things that one can do without. As writers, we get so attached to the material that we have created that it's very, very difficult for us to let go of anything. So when we are told that something maybe can be chopped off, it's a heartbreaking process to do that. But to understand that, so the editor must be able to make me understand why that is vital. Ultimately, readers and editors work together for the common goal that the book should be, that the book should turn out to the best possible version of itself. And so if there can be some sort of a symbiosis there, where I understand her point of view, she understands my point of view, and we are reaching somewhere, we have a middle ground where we can operate in. There can be negotiations where I accept some of hers, she accepts some of mine, and ultimately the book is a joint love story, if I may put it that way. Then I think the book succeeds, and that is exactly what happened with Mahagatha. It was a wonderful symphony that I had with my editor, and there was this constant to and fro happening every day, and she would see the points I was trying to make, I would see what she was trying to say, and how she could make the book even better. So ultimately, that middle ground is very important, and very few editors get that and understand the reader and the writer, and also the targeted audience that the book is being written for. So if all of these boxes are being ticked, then you are blessed to have a good editor. That is really important.
Nice. That's, I think, so important to
Yeah.
understand. I think both for a writer as well as an editor, and
Yes.
actually even for the publisher, right? Because it's
Of
essentially
course.
the publisher that
Absolutely.
decides on
Yeah.
who's going to edit that book. Uh,
Yes.
Can I,
I
Abhinav, sorry, can I just have one question to ask? Okay.
Yeah, sure. In fact, I have also just one more question, so go ahead.
Sure.
So, Satyarth, since you're talking about the writing process and everything, is there how do you go about writing? Is there a set time of the day? Do you have a certain target number of words per week, per month? Uh,
Yeah.
what is your writing? Can you just talk about that a little?
Sure. So I'm a graveyard shift writer. I write best at night when the world is asleep and I can just be with my thoughts. And I think for me somehow that time, uh, just my brain just works so much better. I'm not a morning person at all. I hate getting up early in the mornings. So I write better at night. So that is the time. That is my hallowed hour when I'm writing. And so that's my process. Also. I do not. I mean, like for Mahagatha, I remember I had kind of given myself maybe a story a day. But so while you give yourself some sort of a deadline, but you don't really stick to that. Like I don't believe in completely sticking to that, because there are days you just don't feel like writing. There are days it's like you open the tap and there's nothing flowing out. So you just shut the computer and just go back and do something else. So writing is such a lonely process, also such an unpredictable process, because you don't know what will come out when. And then there are days that I finish 2 stories in a day because I'm just writing that furiously, because the mind is suddenly alive with so much, and everything that I'm putting on paper is just looks and sounds brilliant. So there are these good days and bad days, and ultimately writer needs to understand that, and I do the same. So I don't, while I have a certain some sort of a tentative deadline in mind, I don't stick to that. Ultimately, it is about what I'm able to produce, and if I've had a good day of writing, I'm happy. If I haven't had a good day of writing, then you do know that you'll come back to it tomorrow and things will work out. And that, I've seen that happening. There are times when one thinks that, okay, maybe this is a problem that cannot be solved, and you sleep over it, and the next day suddenly you realize the answer was staring you the entire time. It was there in your mind. You just needed to open that door. So, so it's a magical process how writing works and how things fall in place, and how characters talk to you suddenly one day, and how your story suddenly takes a different course, and you have nothing but you follow that. So it's a, I think once, after a point, a book just takes a life of its own, and then ultimately you just have to nurture it and just keep nourishing it, and then you give it out into the world and say, I'm no longer a part of this. It's the readers now, and if they love the book, then then you feel validated. So yeah, it's a weird process. It's a strange process. It's a crazy process, but I wouldn't change it for anything else in the world.
What's the longest you've written at one stretch? In terms of time, is it an hour, 2 hours? What's the longest?
No, like I
I'll
said, when there are,
before you answer that, I'll tell you why I'm asking you. Because
yeah,
I find
yeah,
it very difficult. I find that my limit for writing at a stretch is maybe 1.5 to 2 hours. After that,
okay.
my brain gets fried. I can't write
It
anymore.
shuts off. Yeah, it
Yeah.
shuts off. Like I said, it's about good days and bad days. Like if it's a bad day, I can't even write. I know I can't even write for 10 minutes. It just doesn't flow. Your ideas are not there, and you're not getting the right words. So you're not able to express and communicate what you're trying to say. It happens. And when it's a good day, I remember writing maybe 2 3 hours. Because it's just flowing. Suddenly you are in some sort of a magical zone, and words are flowing out, and your lines are forming exactly how you want them, and characters are behaving in the way you want them to. So everything is falling into place. So it is just one of the, I think it's like I said, it is about a good day and a bad day. Ultimately, that is what really, at least for me, that's how it has been so far.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, I think that's a discussion in its own right that one can talk
Yeah.
about a lot. But I think
Yes.
at the end of the day, it comes down to how regularly, consistently you can write, and how well you can
Yes.
write in the
Yes.
first draft, so you don't have to spend cycles in editing the a second,
Yeah.
third, fourth time.
Yeah.
The question that I wanted to ask you, Satyarth, in closing was that you've written a biography, you've written a thriller, you have now written a Puranic book. You've also written for television. Uh,
Yeah.
how have you made? I mean, this is fantastic. How have you been able to make the switch between one genre versus the other?
So I basically love all these four genres. I think it is just that has kept me going. I mean, what you say is something I hear a lot. That why don't you stick to one particular genre? Why do you keep genre hopping from one to the other? And I get that a lot. But it's just that because I love reading all these four genres, I've always wanted to explore all four of them. So it just comes from that. And I know that if I stick to one particular genre, I'll myself get bored as a writer. So when I wrote two thrillers back to back, I was very sure I don't want to write a third thriller because I had got bored and I would end up repeating myself if I wrote a third one. So it had to be something different. So I look for a new adventure every time. It has to be a new challenge, something that I haven't done, in my last book. So it is just as simple as that. It has to be something that is as exciting and refreshing. That again brings me back to, because writing also is a tiring process. It's a I mean, while you enjoy once you get into it, you're loving it. But to actually enter that zone and spend a year of your life again creating a book, you better be sure that you will enjoy what you are doing. Otherwise, it can become really, really, it can almost become a torture. So I need to be excited about the idea, which is why every new genre, every new book has been an exciting adventure, has been a new journey. I mean, when I wrote the Sridevi biography, it was the first time I was doing a biography. So that had charged me up so much that this is the first time I'm presenting a real life story. It's nonfiction. So I need to give it that amount of dignity and that amount of respect. Then again, when I came to Mytho, then it had its own set of challenges. So every new genre has a new set of challenges, and that is what keeps me going. So it is just that, which is why I've been dabbling in all four, and I would, in fact, love to write a historical next. That is the only thing I have not written so far, and love reading histories. I've been a huge history fan, also besides mythology. And there's so much in Indian history to explore. So maybe that is something that I will look forward to creating at some point in my life.
Is there a particular genre
Fascinating.
that's your favorite among the four? If I were to ask you to pick one, which one would it be?
Not sure if I can answer that. I think though I think mytho and thrillers would rank really high. Yeah, I think those two are really really very close to my heart. And then of course biographies and then history. But yeah, mytho and thrillers are really up there for me when it comes to reading and of course now writing.
Okay, thank you.
I think we'll have to have Satyarth come back a second time to answer a lot of these questions about these other genres and all.
Yeah.
But in the
Yeah.
meantime, Satyarth, I'd like to thank you on behalf of Indica Books. It's been a
Thank you.
pleasure having you on.
Thank you so much.
Come on board and talk to us about the creative process, the writing, the inspiration behind the book. The book we have been talking about, folks, has been Mahagatha, 100 Tales from the Puranas. It's been published by HarperCollins. It's available in paperback and as a Kindle ebook. So I encourage all of you to go get a copy, read it, and like all authors will tell you, if you read it, if you like it, do leave a review, a comment on Amazon or other websites. It's important.
Yeah. Very important.
We will come back with our next Q&A, but Satyarth, thank you for being live here with Indica Books.
Yeah,
thank you, Abhinav. Thank you, Arun. This was a wonderful conversation. So glad to to be a part of the Indica family finally, and I hope if the sequel happens, we have another conversation very soon. Looking forward to that. Thank you.
Absolutely, and perhaps even before that, but certainly we'll look forward to your sequel. But in the meantime, we'll all enjoy your first book on the Mahapuranas.
Thank you. Thank you again. Thank you so much.